In this episode, the featured film sets the standard for all private detective movies made ever since, takes a hard-working actor who just recently landed leading roles and turns him into a superstar, and shows that by not fussing with a good story, you can make a terrific film. These stories and more from the 22nd row. The Maltese Falcon was released in 1941. It's in the private detective genre and the mystery genre. In fact, it's a series of mysteries. It has a fabulous script and a legendary cast who were not legends when this film was released, but became legends shortly afterwards. Now, I have to admit that this is one of my favorite films, partly because I like the private detective genre. Many of my favorite films are in that genre. Partly because I like good stories, and this one has a tight, terrific story. And partly because every time I watch it, it seems better than the last time. And that's got to count for something. So let's first look at the story. The source material was a novel written by Dashiell Hammett. And I've mentioned Dashiell Hammett in a previous episode on Chinatown. Dashiell Hammett was from San Francisco. He was a writer of some repute through the 20s in the pulps, and then published in 1930 The Maltese Falcon, to much acclaim. It was very well received, and in fact, over the years, many critics have considered Hammett not only a great detective fiction writer, but a great writer. Anyhow, it's a really great book. I've read it. It's very well done, and it was perfect fodder for a movie. Now, the funny thing is, Our Maltese Falcon, the 1941 release, was not the first adaptation of Hammett's book. The first adaptation was in 1931. Now, I've seen some clips of this film. It was also called The Maltese Falcon, and this isn't the time or place to compare and contrast the two movies. Suffice to say, this film, the 1941 film, was another adaptation and was in effect a remake of the 1931 film, if you want to call it that, or you can just say they took the book and made another film. Now, why the powers that be, in this case Warner Brothers, decided to do this, who knows? But they decided to take another crack at this book. I don't know how popular the 1931 version was. It's now just a footnote in time, rarely mentioned, whereas our 1941 Falcon is considered a terrific film, a timeless film, and I'll talk about why I think that is true. But Warner Brothers decided to remake this film, and for whatever reasons, they decided on a young man who had a reputation as a writer but had not directed a movie. And they decided to make him the director. Again, I don't know why. All I know is that they did. Now, this young man's name was John Huston. And again, referencing an earlier episode of Chinatown, John Huston acted in the movie Chinatown. So of his many claims to fame, one of them is that he directed arguably the strongest version of the private detective film in this genre. And then some 30 years later, acted in what I think is an equal to that film in Chinatown. So that's saying something. So the film was very popular and was a tremendous success right out the door. And it was funny because Warner Brothers chose this untested person to direct the film. So how did this happen? I don't know why they chose that, but the result was spectacular. Now, how does it happen? How does a film become so good when Hollywood, by this time, 10 years after Talking Pictures began, were making hundreds of films every year? Why did this one do so much better than others? There were more than a few films that did really, really well. But if you think about hundreds of films, many of them were good. Some of them were not so good. But this one, like 3 or 4 others around this time, have lasted through the years, have been very well received and continue to be well received. How does that happen? Well, for me, I'm fascinated by the decision-making process. Did the people at the time who were making this film know that they were making a classic? Or did they think that they were just making another film like the one they made 2 weeks ago and the one they made 2 weeks before that? One of the places that is very hard to get answers from is from the people who actually were in the film, either the actors, the director, the screenwriter, or the studios, with their contemporary accounts, and they're usually in hindsight, and they say one of two things most of the time. They say, well, we all knew this was going to be a classic. Or they say, we all thought this was going to be a dud. And they say that again and again and again in hindsight for so many movies, and I think it's just for entertainment purposes. I take what they say with a grain of salt, because maybe they're doing it to entertain, maybe they're doing it to be blasé about something that's terrific, who knows. But I really don't think when they're making these films that they think they have something wonderful on their hands. Now, occasionally someone might say, you know, we really thought something good was happening when we were making this film, but we didn't want to say anything about it. And other people say, well, you know, I had made 4 films that year. Even A-list actors made a lot of movies year in and year out during the golden age of Hollywood. And they would say, well, you know, it was just another film. Yeah, we had an A-list group and it was a good story, but could have been just as good as the film I made 3 months ago or 6 months ago. So nobody really knows, even though they say they do. And that leads me to a fellow by the name of William Goldman. He was a screenwriter who worked in the 60s and 70s, has a tremendous repertoire, has a lot of very good films that he wrote for. And he wrote a book called Adventures in the Screen Trade, another very respected book. It talks about his life in pictures. And one of the things he says in that book, if I have the quotation correct, it might even be a chapter title, but I don't quite remember because I did read the book quite a while ago. He says, nobody knows anything. So if we're talking about making movies and the result is something spectacular, and my question is, do they know at the time that they're making something spectacular? Goldman says no. So let's look at this scenario. We're in the studio, 1941, 1939, 1950, whatever year during the golden age of Hollywood. And what they do is they want to make money. From the dawn of films, filmmakers want to make money. They want to make good movies, but they also want to make money. So they get together in whatever room the studio heads or whoever the powers that be are that are going to make this next film, and they say we have to put together elements. Now we're talking about A-list elements. I've talked before about A-lists and B-lists and how the A-list films had the biggest budgets, the biggest stars. So they got to get the best stars, the A-list stars, the A-list directors, the A-list producers, the A-list screenwriters, the A-list technicians. We put them all together and we have a hit. Well, the reality is sometimes yes and sometimes no. The same process can result in a terrific film and it can result in a flop. So go figure. But I'm with Goldman when he says nobody knows anything. So that creative process is very curious to me. How can we judge what the people are doing if they know what they're doing is great, if they don't, if they're just going through the motions? You know, Hollywood made, as I said, hundreds of films every year, and to know ahead of time or during that they were doing something special, it's very hard to say. So I think about the artist putting pen to paper, the brush to the canvas, the chisel to the block of granite. What are they the best judge of the result? Will he or she say, this is terrific or this is terrible? And even at times when you read about them, they'll say, oh, that painting was awful, or I hated that novel. And yet the critics or Time has said that the novel was quite good, or the painting is, if not renowned in its time, is renowned now. We can't look into the soul of the artist, but I think that's where the truth is about this creative process. If the artist is saying, I achieved what I tried to achieve with this novel, with this film, with this painting, with this sculpture, then they've succeeded. Whether or not they succeed financially, if you remember, I think it was Vincent van Gogh did not sell a single painting in his lifetime, died penniless. Others were spectacularly wealthy. Certainly the studios in the filmmaking business were spectacularly wealthy. But I think the key to creativity is, did you achieve what you wanted to achieve? And that is the definition of success. So we have the Maltese Falcon. It is, by definition, the private detective film. So what is the structure of a private detective film? Now, whether or not that structure was created in the novel or in films before the Maltese Falcon is a terrific example of this structure. First of all, of course, we have a private eye. In this case, we have partners. Not unusual to have two private eyes or a private eye company. Normally, it's one person or two people. Then they have the secretary in the front room, the faithful, adoring secretary who always has a funky name. In this case, it's Effie. Sam Spade, our main character, calls her Effie darling or precious or you're an angel. And for some reason that character stuck, and in so many private detective films that character has lasted right down through the years. Then we have the femme fatale, the woman, and it seems that what starts the film, what gets the story going, is always a female. She comes in with a problem. Now, these problems in the private detective films are never about murders or something big. It's always very mundane things. I can't find my husband. I need you to find my wife. I'm looking for my daughter. I'm looking for my son. They're kind of run-of-the-mill things that ex-police officers who become private detectives are good at. They know how to find people. They know how to sit in a car overnight and watch a hotel till the person comes out. So all of these films have the same beginnings. If you take Chinatown, as I said, another terrific example of the genre, it starts off with a very mundane request. And the Maltese Falcon is no different. It's a very mundane request. But of course, in all of these private detective films, something really bad happens and things change in a hurry. And that gets the story going. And so that's the catalyst to all the films. Starts out ordinary, has the secretary, has the private eyes, they want to make money, they get a client come in, usually a woman, maybe because they're vulnerable and they need help, who knows. And what happens is not what is expected, and that changes everything, and that gets the story going. So we have the classic story, the classic beginning. We have these characters in place, and what every private detective film has is a cast of characters. Weird, funky, street characters, down and out characters, exotic characters. And the Maltese Falcon is no exception. They have really exotic characters. There are 3 other main players. We also have the necessary policemen who know our detective from a previous life. Maybe he's got into trouble with the cops before, but they got a cop who likes them, and a cop who doesn't like them. This is in film after film after film. And it's not cliche, it's just how they set these movies up. And for me, it really works. And then they have smaller and smaller roles for people, cabbies, night clerks, cops on the beat. All of these people populate the film. So they're all there, they're all put together, we've got all the elements. We have, in this case, 2 private eyes. The femme fatale, the woman comes in, she needs to find someone, and they like her money and they decide to do that, and then something terrible happens. Great. Now we have to populate this film with actors. And this is 1941. So I want to start with the character actors first. There are two parts in this film with very exotic, very fun actors. And so much fun that the audience loved them. And these two actors did 9 more films together, now not stars, but acted in together, 9 more films in the next 10 years. The first one I want to talk about is a fellow, his name is Peter Lorre. And he was a European actor. I think he was a combination of Hungarian and German. Very exotic looking, very diminutive, very thin, has very exotic facial features, speaks with an accent. And he had been tremendously successful in Europe. He had done a movie released in 1931 called M, and he was the star in it, and it was about a child, a serial killer. But it's a very well thought of film, and it's creepy and it's fun, and if you can call it fun, but it's certainly worth seeing. So he had done really well in Europe, but like many of the actors, as I've mentioned, in the 30s, they ended up either in England, or if England was a staging point, then Hollywood, because they had to get out of Europe. So he made his way to Hollywood and did many, many films. Never a star, he's a character actor. Did many, many films, and then eventually made his way to the Maltese Falcon. And his character, which is taken from the book, has a terrific name. His name is Joel Cairo. And that name has resonated throughout the years. In fact, it's been used in at least one song that I know of, and maybe a couple more. And is just a fabulous character, a lot of fun, very, very exotic, and very, very identifiable. When he's on the screen, it's almost like he owns the screen. Now he doesn't, because he works in tandem with all these people, but it really is not hard to see how popular he was with the film going public. The second character actor was 60 years old when he made his film debut in Hollywood. I'm not sure if he had made films in England or not. He was English, but he had been on the stage and was relatively successful on the stage, found himself in Hollywood, and in 1940, let's say when this film was made, or 41, it was his first film. And his name has this fabulous name. His real name was Sidney Greenstreet. At least his cinema name was Sidney Greenstreet. So why did these two click? Well, they clicked because they're opposites. Sidney Greenstreet was big. 6 foot, I don't think much bigger than 6 feet tall. Very heavy. I've read things where they say he was 340, 350 pounds. When you see him on the screen in this film, he's big. He looks big. Is he that big? Maybe, but he doesn't look that big. But I suppose he could have been close to 300 pounds, and he's tall. So we have the classic Hollywood combination that they love so much, with people to have them jump out of the screen even more, not just filling up space, especially when the A-list pictures, where they wanted to have a little bit of meat in the film, have layers, have a lot more going on than just the story, especially if the story was kind of ordinary as opposed to spectacular like this one is. So they had a diminutive, thinny guy and a large, heavy-set guy, and the audience put the two of them together, and they loved them. And as I said, these two went on to make 9 films together in the next 10 years. Now, they made many more films than that, not hundreds more, but they made more films than that. But they were together in 9 more films. And in fact, they were together in a film a year later, which is my most favorite film of all time, which I will talk about in a few episodes. And they once again were just spectacular. The sad thing is that Sidney Greenstreet made these films but died in 1950. So he only was around for 10 more years. I guess he had complications due to his size, but he passed on in 1950. So he had a 10-year span in Hollywood, although he was 70 years old, 1941 to 1950. Peter Lorre lasted longer. He lasted into the 60s. He also had some health problems near the end of his life, but he made many films. Was again a very, very recognizable character actor. The audiences knew who he was, and he made several more films over the next 20 years. But their claim to fame is the 9 films they did together, this film and 3 or 4 others, and they became legends because everybody who is a film buff knows these actors. And as I said, popular culture has made these people into characters. Joel Cairo is the one character, and the big fella, his name is Casper Gutman. So I think Dashiell Hammett had a tremendous way with names, and these two names are their names in the film. So they just are, I think, spectacular in this film. They are so convincing. They're so interesting to look at, the way they talk, the way they act, especially Sidney Greenstreet as Caspar Gutman. Very classy, very gentlemanly, even though he is what he is, and he's not one of the good guys. That's all. I'll leave that there. And Joel Cairo, our friend Peter Lorre, is also not one of the good guys, but he is also very classy in a different way, and their interplay is just wonderful. So now we've populated our character actors in this film, the two main ones. There's a couple others that have smaller roles, but they do a fine job, but I want to focus on these guys. And then let's focus on our leading man. Now, I remember when I first saw this film, I saw it on television. I don't remember how old I was. I think it was in the 70s, so I might have been a teenager. I might have already been in university. And I loved the film. And I was fascinated by watching these old movies when you don't know anybody. I mean, by 1942, our leading man was already a superstar, and so the audiences would say, oh, I want to go see him. I want to see him in this, and oh, he's got another picture coming out. But as a viewer of today, or as a viewer even when I started, which was 30 years after this film, you don't know anybody. You don't know what to expect. You know movies have leading men and leading women and character actors, but none of them are recognizable. And that's why I wish I could see a film like this in the theater with a whole bunch of new first-time viewers and see the reaction to these stars and see if they can catch why these actors became so famous or did so well, or the audience just ate them up. His name, our leading man's name, was Humphrey Bogart. He had been working in Hollywood for at least 10 years, if not longer. He had had minor roles. He played a lot of gangster roles. And so when we see him for the first time, as I did in The Maltese Falcon, you see his face. Now, he doesn't have a kind face. He doesn't have he doesn't look like he has a Hollywood handsome face. It's tough, but it's mean. It looks like his skin is a bit pockmarked. It looks like he's got a scar near his mouth. He looks angry. He looks nasty. And it makes complete sense that many of the roles he got in the middle late 30s, he was playing gangsters, and he died in a lot of his pictures. So somehow, again, the powers that be thought that he had a little bit more than that. Maybe they saw that he was, the audience liked him as a bit player, recognized him in all the films he did, and somehow they decided to start putting him in lead roles. The Maltese Falcon wasn't his first lead role. So here I am watching this film for the first time, and I see this guy very early in the film, and well, he doesn't look like a superstar. He, as I said, he's got a kind of a harsh face, kind of mean eyes, but he commands the screen. There's no doubt that after a few minutes you say, this is our guy. His character name in the film, by the way, is Sam Spade, a name that will go down in the annals of private detective fiction, private detective movies. Sam Spade is just a great name. And within a few minutes, when you get into the film, when the plot devices that kick the film into high gear work, you are with this guy all the way. You like him. He's tough. He can be mean. He can be funny. He's got the snappy dialogue that all private detectives have in all these movies. And by the end of the film, you are completely on his side. So Bogart is, for me, a mystery. He isn't the classic Hollywood star. I've talked about Cary Grant, who I think was the epitome of the elegant Hollywood star, the leading man bar none. He was handsome, tall, great actor, really good to look at. Then we talked about a tough actor, a rugged guy, and this would be John Wayne. He was rugged, he was tough, but he didn't have a mean face, he didn't have mean eyes. He was like your favorite uncle who might have been a sportsman or something, but was a big, tough, strong guy who had a heart of gold. And so you can see how he would have been a classic leading man as well, and was a classic leading man during the golden age of Hollywood. But Bogart had something else. I think he had inside him something that came out of him, came out onto the screen. He was tough. He could be mean. He could say nasty things, but somehow we liked him. And that's that unknown for Hollywood and these casting directors who, and whoever made the decisions on who to cast, somehow could see, because to see these stars, because I guess they had been at it for so long, they could always say, there's something about this guy. Oh, this one, he's really good looking, but there's not much going on there. The camera doesn't really love him. But this guy, boy, he looks like he's just come out of a fight. Maybe he had a skin condition when he was younger. But there's something about this guy that makes him a star. And with Bogart, they were right. Eventually the fans and even his friends would call him Bogey. And like I said, he made this film and became immediately upon the success of the film, a superstar. A year or maybe 2 years later, most, I think a year later, he starred in my favorite film. Throughout the 40s, he played in many terrific films, really well known: The Treasure of Sierra Madre, Casablanca, To Have and Had Not, and more, African Queen, and more. And sadly, got very ill in the mid-50s and passed away, or I think around 1957, 1958. But he had a great run, and he was a terrific leading man. The audiences loved him. The movies he acted in many of them were terrific films. He even did some comedies. He did a lot of drama. He did some very, very tough films, but he was a star, and he is now another one of these Hollywood legends from the great era of Hollywood legends. So we now have our main characters. Now, the woman who played the femme fatale, her name was Mary Astor. She had an off-screen reputation. Who cares? The first-time viewer doesn't know anything about that. She played the part to a T as the do we trust her, do we not trust her femme fatale in this film. The cops are stock actors. They appeared in many films over the next 20 years. There's a young man who is a gangster in the film who does his job nicely. So the whole cast just works. The story just works in, 100 times over, just works. And it's interesting that the film is the Maltese Falcon. Now, unlike, let's say, Chinatown, where we, the audience, knows only what our private detective hero knows and nothing more, this movie begins with a 20-second rolling credit, which talks about the bird. The Maltese Falcon is a bird, and it talks about the history of this bird, this very famous statue that was made for various reasons, and it goes through the history of it. And then it says basically the bird at some point in history disappeared. And of course, our story is eventually we find out that people are looking for this bird. So that's unusual, it's different, but in this film I think it works fine. And again, it's like we need to know something about this bird because the movie's called The Maltese Falcon, and we do. So we know the bird, but Sam Spade, he doesn't know about the bird for several minutes into the film, if not 15 minutes, 20 minutes or so, because there's a lot of other things going on. We know that very quickly something, well, we don't know, but we and Sam Spade find out very quickly that something really bad happens, and they have to react to that. We find out that Sam is, well, he's a private detective. He's an ex-cop. He's a man of the streets. He's a man who is, even though he's got a heart of gold, he's also a tough guy. It reminds me very much of Raymond Chandler's essay when he talks about the private detective. In his case, he talks about his detective, Philip Marlowe, that Raymond Chandler wrote about. And he says that the private detective is the best man in his world and a good enough man for any world. So Sam is an imperfect man. He's flawed. We see in the movie how he's flawed, but we also see that he's a seeker of truth. And I think that's very important for us to enjoy this film because we want to know the truth as well. There's, like I said, a lot of mysteries going on here, and we want to know what's going on just as much as Sam Spade wants to know what's going on. So that's the picture. We've got a terrific cast. We have a great story, beyond a great story. we have the execution is spectacular from this young director who had never directed a film before, who went on to have also had a fabulous career for the next 30 years, John Huston. And again, as a lover of creativity and as fascinated by it, who knows why everything clicked for this film, with an untested director, someone who was a leading man but not a star. Why it all worked, I think it comes down to a large extent, just a fabulous story, and the director deciding not to fuss with it too much, to take the book, take the best elements of the book that you can put into 95, 100 minutes of film, and tell the story that the book tells as best you can. And I think if that was the decision, and who knows, if that was the decision, it was a brilliant decision. Because the Maltese Falcon was a big hit in 1941, and it has remained a hit throughout the decades. And one of the reasons I like it so much is, as I said, every time I watch it, it's better than the last time. And so the Maltese Falcon is just as good as it then as it is now, as I watch it from the 22nd row.